So my presentation is on the Clean Slate Act. The Clean Slate Act is a criminal justice initiative. It was signed into law last November by New York State Governor Kathy Hochul and will take effect November 2024. Under the Clean Slate Act, people who complete their sentences and do not commit further crimes will have convictions sealed. Eligible misdemeanor convictions will be sealed after 3 years, and eligible felony convictions sealed after 8 years for individuals following release from incarceration. In New York, roughly 1 million felonies and 4 million misdemeanors will be eligible for sealing. Class A felonies such as sex crimes and murder are not eligible for automatic sealing. Crimes not sealed to law enforcement agencies, courts, and employers serving vulnerable populations, such as children, the elderly, and people with disabilities, that require fingerprint-based background checks. So the crimes won't be sealed to these organizations. So the social problem that the Clean Slate Act addresses is injustice toward the formerly incarcerated. As I'm sure most of you know, millions of formerly incarcerated individuals are discriminated against through background checks conducted by employers, landlords, and educational institutions. This prevents them from getting jobs, housing, and education upon release from incarceration. And people with a known criminal record make 40% less money per year than people without a criminal record. And New Yorkers living with a criminal record miss out on $2.4 billion in wages annually. 80% of these people are non-white. Formerly incarcerated individuals without jobs may commit more crimes out of financial desperation. Criminal justice is social justice, so here are some facts from the Brennan Center for Justice. Roughly 30% of people with a conviction record in New York State are Black, but only 15% of the state's overall population is Black. Black New Yorkers make up 43% of formerly imprisoned people in the state. Felony convictions reduce a person's earnings by 20% and misdemeanors by 15%. An estimated 337,000 New Yorkers have been imprisoned at some point in their lives, and reduced earning potential related to time in prison costs them $1.9 billion every year. Research shows that criminal records can contribute to or exacerbate poverty. Reversing the financial harms of criminal records should be a priority for policymakers, especially those hoping to reduce economic inequality. And studies show that sealing criminal records boosts wages and employment. So these are pretty shocking statistics, though you may be familiar with them. So to put a human face to this issue, Sheena Mead is CEO of the Clean Slate Initiative. So take about 5 minutes and you can watch her TED Talk by clicking on that link. You can pause the presentation. So to summarize Sheena's story, Sheena Mead was arrested for a check that bounced. And she says in her TED Talk, "I was punished for being poor." She was handcuffed in front of her children, which was very traumatizing. And she said, she referenced prosecution discretion, which is that police did not have to arrest her, but they chose to anyway. The arrest remained on her record, preventing her from getting apartments, jobs, entry to college, and professional certifications. And she said, "After the arrest, my true sentence began." So the Clean Slate Act addresses criminal injustice. It supports the reintegration of individuals with conviction histories. 1 in 3 people have an arrest conviction on their record, and Sheena mentioned this in her TED Talk. So the Clean Slate Act would help reduce barriers to formerly incarcerated individuals getting jobs, housing, and education. And Sheena cited this statistic: 72% colleges and 94% of employers do background checks. The Clean Slate Act also addresses consequences of systemic injustices that disproportionately affect people of color. People with minor offenses or wrongfully convicted can get their names cleared. And this Clean Slate Act can help employers deal with a workforce shortage. There's a bias against folks with a criminal record, and this depresses the economy. 78 to 87 billion lost in GDP as a result. So what are supporters saying? Here are some quotes. This one's by Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz, who's a Queens Democrat. And she said, "We're going to start breaking that cycle of poverty and injustice that has been perpetrated by a criminal justice system that was designed to do exactly what it's doing right now, to keep people eternally under its thumb and changing generations to come. As a society, we should be judged on our ability to give strength to the downtrodden, to empower the disenfranchised, to give justice to the invisible, and forgive those who seek redemption." And then the OCA Chief Administrative Judge Joseph Zayas says this legislation is fully consistent with the judiciary's ongoing efforts to facilitate the reintegration of individuals with conviction histories and address the consequences of systemic injustices. Supporters are also saying the New York Attorney General Letitia James says the millions of New Yorkers who have paid their dues and are ready to rebuild their lives deserve a second chance. The Clean Slate Act will help ensure our justice system is fair and more equitable and help build stronger families and communities by making it easier for formerly incarcerated New Yorkers to find stable housing, good-paying jobs, and quality education. And then Governor Kathy Hochul says, "I believe that the best anti-crime tool we have is a job." So that's her opinion. What are some of the concerns from opponents? The Clean Slate Act seals records for violent crimes like manslaughter, assault, burglary, strangulation, and others that are not those Class A felonies I mentioned earlier, like sex offense and murder. Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley, a Republican, says if you're hiring someone to take care of your elderly parents, you would think you'd want to know if they've been involved in robbery, burglary, gang assaults. Those are the types of crimes that would be sealed under this Clean Slate bill. And then prosecutors like Albany County District Attorney David Soares, a Democrat, he helped influence significant changes to the legislation, including allowing police and the courts to access records. So in a previous iteration of the Clean Slate Act, they couldn't access records, and prosecutors kind of pushed for that. But he adds the carve-outs for certain officials, worked out, but employers and state agencies aren't enough. He says, if you're a parent who's looking for childcare, you may be hiring someone who has had a violent past, and you just don't know it. So public safety and employer rights are the concerns from the opponents. Here's another concern from Senate Minority Leader Robert Ort, who represents Niagara Falls area. "I do not think this is going to solve the employee shortage that our employers are seeing here. We continue to pass legislation like this that is really geared toward those who have broken the law, the criminal class, and not those who might be victims." So these are the concerns from the opponents. Here are some more facts from the Brennan Center for Justice. 77% of convictions in New York State are for misdemeanors, and 76% of New Yorkers with a conviction record have a misdemeanor as their most serious offense. And this suggests that most sealed convictions would be misdemeanors, and most beneficiaries would be people who have never been convicted of a felony. So pretty minor crimes, people who committed pretty minor crimes would be the majority of the beneficiaries of the Clean Slate Act. 53% of people with a conviction have only one offense on their record, and nearly half of all people with a record have not been convicted of a crime in 2 decades. Beneficiaries of the Clean Slate Act would be people with criminal records that are either very short, very dated, or both, and it would wipe their records clean. So this would be a huge service to people who really didn't commit very serious crimes and haven't committed crimes for a long time. So I wanted to mention the Clean Slate Act and trauma-informed policy because we just read the Bowen and Rashid reading, and I thought it was relevant to this issue. Incarceration is strongly associated with trauma in terms of the prevalence of violence and abuse in correctional settings and the family disruptions that occur when a family member is incarcerated. And Sheena mentioned this family disruption in her TED Talk. Trauma is also a concern for ex-offenders returning to their communities following incarceration because they often struggle to secure stable housing and employment and may return to lifestyles that include violence, drug use, and high-risk survival behaviors such as trading sex for money. Trauma-informed drug policy should therefore include measures to support individuals transitioning from prisons and ensure that they have access to basic social safety net programs, employment, housing, and education. And the Clean Slate Act does that. It's an example of a trauma-informed policy. So here's a map of clean slate legislation in the United States. Only 12 states have passed laws that meet Clean Slate Initiative criteria for clean slate legislation. And you can tell the bulk of those are in the Northeast. And then there's, Minnesota and California, Utah. So the red states are the ones. Here are some references that you can look at the end of my presentation. You can click on any of these links for further information. And here are some questions I have for you. Are you in favor of or opposed to the Clean Slate Act? Why or why not? What do you think of the arguments stated by supporters and opponents of the Clean Slate Act? Given the facts reported by the Brennan Center for Justice, are the public safety and employer rights concerns of opponents valid? Why or why not? And lastly, what can social workers do on the micro and macro levels to support vulnerable populations, such as formerly incarcerated individuals? I look forward to hearing your thoughts about this issue. Thank you.